Oak Island is one of among approximately 360 small islands in Mahone Bay, on the south shore of Nova Scotia, Canada. The island is connected to the mainland by a causeway at a small community named Martin's Point. This tree-covered island is approximately 3/4 of a mile long, and in some locales up to a half a mile wide, and is the location of the infamous money pit that has mesmerized fortune hunters for over 220 years. The circular depression in the ground, discovered in 1795, has ended up through the years garnering international attention, along with a myriad of rumors, legends, and hoaxes. The reason this enigma has never been solved is that modern man has underestimated the intelligence of the creator of these coded messages. Brawn and technology has not trumped the creativity of the sophisticated mind that takes these symbols to new depths and heights. Nuances of his mindset at the time the voyager visited Oak Island are quite different than today's dependence on technological devices to do the thinking. The messages conveyed could tend to make one believe that there's a grand design working in the backdrop for humankind. Treasure could possibly exist, but maybe the true treasure is the messages conveyed from the remaining clues that have been left on the island. In this series of Brothers of the Sword Productions videos, we're going to examine the 4 main vestiges of clues that have managed to survive the ravages of time and decipher their meaning. The first is the stone that was inscribed with unusual symbols that was reportedly found in the money pit circa 1804 at a 90-foot depth. In 1866, a Halifax University professor purportedly translated the message into 40 feet below 2 million pounds are buried. This replica of the stone is now found in the Oak Island Museum and was taken from a 1919 letter that passed hands until it surfaced in 1949, with the sequence of symbols copied firsthand from the stone. Around the time the letter had been written in 1919, the inscribed stone mysteriously disappeared from a storefront window where it was allegedly on display. Although a new translation of the stone is not necessary to find a possible treasure location of interest, it does bring much peripheral information into the party that answers some crucial questions. Now we'll start translating the first symbol group on the stone. Yes, the symbols can be translated into words, but the symbols also give the clues to the meanings for each letter translation. Before we get started, I'd like to qualify that the 2 slashes over the second V is indicating duality, 1 and 2, multiple meanings for some symbols, and also signifies mirror images for reflection and symmetry. In fact, the 2 identical V's themselves represent the concept of mirror image. In summary, some symbols will have many functions and messages. The lines on top of the V's will spring into action in part 2. In Roman numerals, V is equal to 5. Therefore, we have the number 55. The next symbol is a reverse percent sign, which we will find out represents an O or a 0. This symbol depicts what is called a great circle, which is the largest possible circle that can be drawn around a sphere that divides the sphere into 2 equal halves, and is also its diameter. The navigation great circle represents the shortest distance between 2 points on a sphere, which for the Earth is the preferred route taken by ships and airplanes. Each longitude line or meridian on the globe is the same length and represents half of a great circle, because all the lines meet at the poles. The only great circle latitude-wise is the equator, and all other lines of latitude are called the smaller circles, located on each side of the equatorial great circle. Great circle routes have been an important part of navigation and geography for hundreds of years, and knowledge of them is essential for long-distance travel across the globe. A navigational bearing line demarcated on the surface of the Earth is the direction, and the length of the bearing line is the distance. Therefore, this reverse percent sign represents the great circle for the letter O or 0. The next symbol that follows the great circle is a circle stroke. And as we'll find out, this symbol represents the letter R and the radius of a circle. The circle stroke is an antiquated symbol for diameter. The great circle is a diameter, and the circle stroke represents a diameter. Let's analyze the Greek word diameter. Dia means across or through, and metron means measure. This reinforces the great circle of across for direction and measure for distance. Now that he's pointed out diameter twice, this is pointing out the radius because two radiuses equal the diameter. Radius is the distance from the center of a circle to any point on the circumference. And the great circle requires you to pass through or across the center of the circle or sphere. However, here the line on this symbol extends out both sides of the circumference. And as well, he's pointed out diameter twice, which is indicating a second circle. But working through this two-circle clue will be done at a later date. The next symbol is a triangle, which is the Greek letter delta. The actual D we use today was instated by the Romans. D for delta in this case means diameter, direction, and distance, all the components of a great circle. The traditional scientific meaning for delta is change, especially in chemistry and physics. The next symbol and last symbol of the group is a downward pointing arrow, which I'm interpreting as a vector. A vector indicates movement with a magnitude and a direction. For example, a horse and carriage are moving east at 3 miles per hour. An arrow is also an antiquated symbol for radius. So once again, we're back visiting the great circle for diameter, radius, direction, distance, and the combined vector movement of change. So now we have the word ord, O-R-D, with an arrow behind it. This indicates that the translation of the stone is in Middle English, dating the missive between 1150 to 1500 AD. Ord means place, point of origin, source, and spear point. The total message right now is 55 ord arrow. Now let's put the navigation great circle to work for what it's designed for. The direction of the line on the great circle is called a bearing, which is 55 degrees, and we'll find out the distance by seeing what country or countries the great circle line crosses. You'll understand what I'm doing quite quickly as I go along. In the days when the Oak Island messages were written, the navigators would have been using an astrolabe because the sextant was not discovered until 1730. If I was alive, I would have wanted one and whined that all the scientists on the block were getting one, and why can't I? So now that we know the message is in Middle English, and we know at least one bearing, let's digress and revisit the down-pointing arrow again, before I show you a couple locations with the bearings. I'm going to skip ahead and mention that the word radius comes from the word ray, as in the ray of the sun. And in Middle English, ray is spelled R-A-I-E or R-A-Y-E. The last word in the stone's message is betray. And in Middle English, it's spelled B-I-T-R-A-I-E-N and has the word ray in it. So here he's pointing out radius once again with the presence of the arrow in the first symbol group. However, betray on the stone is missing the first I, and he just uses betray, but it doesn't change anything. And the N is missing too because he's not using the infinitive form. Now the two letters before the word betray is R-I, which is the acronym for king. So he's saying king betrayed. This is some pretty powerful stuff going on here. And this prompts us to ask, is the money pit a point of origin, since the stone was found in the money pit? Now let's go find another possible point of origin using the 55-degree bearing with an unknown distance. For this, I'll be using the geomidpoint bearing and distance calculator. I was given permission by GeoMidpoint to publish JPEG images of their maps from their site as long as I gave them credit as the source of the material. But I'm going to go a step further and will quickly teach you how to use the calculator for those who would like to run the bearings and distances themselves. The GeoMidpoint link is found in the description box below. To find these bearings, the Oak Island visitors would have had to have done some fairly complex trigonometric great circle calculations in order to locate these destinations from Oak Island that the GeoMidpoint calculator will do for us. So let's fill in the information into the calculator. You need to type Oak Island, Nova Scotia, or NS, in the search for place box, and then click Find It. This will set the longitude and latitude for your start point. Fill in the bearing box with the number 55, and fill in the distance box with 2,610.5 miles without a comma or a dot, and set the Earth model to sphere, because we're using the Great Circle and it is a sphere, and we're not making any corrections that the Earth is not completely round. Now click Calculate on the left, and then click See It on the map on the right, and another page will open showing the bearing line. You'll need to zoom in to see the details of the destination. Here's a screenshot of the calculator all filled out, and now we're ready to see where the bearing line is going to go. As the Great Circle line flies, this takes you to the doorstep of St. Patrick's Church, located on the eastern side of the Hill of Tara, in County Meath, Ireland. The existing church was built in 1822 on the site of an earlier church. The earliest evidence of a church at Tara was a charter that dated back to the 1190s. In 1212, the church was among the possessions confirmed to the Knights Hospitaller of St. John of Jerusalem for Killiman, which I tracked down to be associated to the first Norse monastery in Ireland. Now how wild is that? The official dispensation was authorized by Pope Innocent III. The old churches that were not built with stone were called Darteth, meaning oak houses. The name Tara means star, and the hill of Tara functioned as the Tamer Nari, or the seat of the king, and the location of the Lia Fail stone, are also known as the Stone of Destiny, that was used in ancient coronations, that was reportedly brought to the site by the Tuatha De Danann, tribe of the gods. When the king put his foot on the stone, it supposedly roared. The stone had handles and it was carried to the site for coronations. Let's take a look at a second possible bearing location. Roman numerals didn't utilize a zero, but in lieu used the word nulla. But you can't overlook the fact that the next letter after the two V's is an O or a zero. So the next bearing is 50 degrees that will plug into the GeoMidpoint calculator, and will set the distance at 2,701.7 miles. As the Great Circle flies, you land at a stone's throw from Scone Abbey, or Scone Palace Chapel in Scotland, where the Stone of Scone, also known as the Stone of Destiny, resided for coronations of Scottish monarchs. This is the same portable stone that supposedly resided at the Hill of Tara at different times. This abbey dates back to circa 1120 AD, which coincided with the establishment of the Scone Priory, a medieval Christian cult called the Culdees, meaning champions of God. Evidently, the 19th century chapel that stands today was not erected on the exact same spot as the original abbey. That is, if our navigator is spot on, as he was with St. Patrick's Church near the Hill of Tara. It's really interesting how these two bearings land on the most ancient sacred sites in Ireland and Scotland, which were the locations where the Stone of Destiny resided at different times in history. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to put the two V's in front of the word Ord. And it's pretty self-evident that it spells word. During the medieval days, a V was interchangeable with a U, and two U's equaled a W, which is obvious from its name W. This is indicating that Middle English, or at least at the time English words, exists on the message. This is where the second physical clue left on Oak Island comes into action, Nolan's Cross. The cross consists of 5 conical granite boulders weighing approximately 10 tons and 1 sandstone boulder at the intersection of the cross arms. The connection of word to the cross is fairly intrinsic, that it has something to do with the Word of God. The Word in Greek is logos, meaning the divine Word of God. In the Gospel of John, it states, "In the beginning there was the Word, and God was the Word, and the Word was God." Ancient Greek philosophers considered logos the principle of cosmic reason and equated to the Hebrew concept of wisdom. So now we have a Christian connection, but it won't stay that way for long. Although no one is quite sure where the 2 slashes over the second V were positioned. It made sense to me that if the line above the V is outlined in a mirror image, then you can extend the slash to make an S for the word sword, or perhaps the references to 2 swords. So now Nolan's Cross turns into a sword. So far it appears the voyagers were devout Christian warriors that had been betrayed by a king. Pretty cool, eh? With all this in mind, let's find a third possible bearing location. They say Nolan's Cross is 60 degrees from true north, but I don't have any confirmation about this. To get a feel for this, I ended up finding 60.506 degrees at 5,142.5 miles, which brings you to the western wall on the Temple Mount, whereas 60 degrees took you approximately 40 miles north of the wall. These bearings didn't feel right and weren't precise enough for me. However, it appears you readjust this number in the second letter group of the stone to a bearing of 60.4 degrees because the letters in the stone also represent numbers. There's no smoke and mirrors in this. Many of the numbers that correspond to letters are from the Greek alphabet. Since antiquity, each letter in the Greek alphabet has been assigned a number. But these numbers sway from the norm because some English letters don't exist in the Greek alphabet, and some are used as mere convention. Let's go back and redo the bearing at 60.4 degrees at 5,154 miles. And as the Great Circle line flies, it takes you exactly over the Qumran National Park, which is the ancient home of the Dead Sea Scrolls. How interesting! Was something found during a crusade that they brought home with them? In part 2, I'll be addressing the letters, words, and numbers translations for the second symbol group of the stone in detail. And these numeral translations will confirm the 50, 55, and 60.4 bearings that were presented in this video. So now we'll draw our attention back to the word sword and see that the sum of the numbers for the letters equal 360 to 361. Sigma in Greek is S and is the number 200. We've already established that the 2 V's equal 55. And the O for the Great Circle deviates from the Greek numbering system away from Omicron or Omega and is given the value of 1. Rho for R is 100 and delta for D is 4. And this all equals 360. This is definitely telling us that we're on the right track because there are 360 degrees in a circle. The 300 to 361 is telling us that the numbers presented for all of the translations in the future will have a deviation of plus or minus 1. There are 360 pie-shaped wedges in a circle that contain an angle of rotation of 1 degree with an associated arc along the circumference of the circle or sphere. So on top of the components of the great circle of diameter, radius, direction, distance, and vector, our navigator is adding angle, arc, and most importantly, rotation along a circle. All of these clues will come into action to find a possible treasure location of interest. The third clue that I'd like to mention is a stoned outline triangle that was discovered by Captain John William Welling in 1897, and therefore has been coined the Welling Triangle. In the 1930s, entrepreneur and treasure hunter Gilbert Heaton rediscovered the triangle, or at least revived it into the public eye. In 1963, the triangle was surveyed by Arlick Walton before it was destroyed for further excavation. At this point, all I want to do is note the existence of this survey that will be analyzed later on in this series. At the time, no one seemed to recognize any importance to Welling's discovery or its connection to a possible treasure. This is very strange because without clues, you wouldn't have a mystery. Assumptions have to be made and readjusted as information is gathered. The fourth and last clue that I'll profile is what I call the inscribed satellite stone that was found on the island by the same man, Gilbert Heaton, who also rediscovered the Welling Triangle. In this translation, I'll be targeting the plus sign surrounded by 4 dots, which is a symbol for what is called the seed for drawing a Celtic 7-circuit labyrinth. Walking such a labyrinth is embarking on a spiritual path in what is considered a sacred space and is an outer journey pilgrimage with an inner journey purpose. In lieu of costly and dangerous pilgrimages to Jerusalem, in the medieval days paths such as that were constructed and walked in or near churches, gardens, and along roadsides. The spiritual journey in the labyrinth symbolizes a gateway to connect heaven and earth. As the translations get more advanced, it appears that this sacred space surrounds a treasure location. Or should I say a possible treasure location. Therefore, and metaphorically, the great circle used for navigation, and the letter O and the number 0, has now turned into a circle for an inner spiritual quest. Contrary to a maze, which has barriers and dead ends, the labyrinth always brings you to the center. In decoding the future clues, the navigator presents a series of numbers emanating out from a circular point, thus sharing his spiritual journey that will lead us to a location where something or some things that he considered of immense value were hidden, waiting for a discovery at a future point. Personally, I think the creativity of the navigator's mind is astounding. My mission in this part 1 of the Oak Island Prophecy was to introduce the 4 main clues and briefly translate some of their messages. From the tone of the inscribed stone's message, our navigator left some things buried for posterity. Unless this is one big red herring, or someone returned to pilfer the booty. It appears he had no intentions of retrieving whatever he left on Oak Island, and that it was more important to take it out of the hands of the betraying king. We'll see as we get near the end of the trail that the number 55 will come back to find a possible treasure location of interest, assuming the stoned outline survey is correct and that Nolan's Cross truly exists. The main function of the inscribed stone was to convey information about who and why they visited Oak Island. However, what I profiled so far is just the edge of the iceberg. The labyrinth retains its connection with death and a triumphant return. And our navigator gave his last covert messages to the annals of history before returning to his country for a well-documented and very cruel execution.